Welcome back to Alberta Primetime and the Vocal Point now. The man Americans elect as their next president will have impact on Albertans. What can we expect? And why are so many people pinning retirement plans on winning a lottery? Yep. Our Monday Money panel is in tonight. Jane Alm is a senior investment advisor with Angus Advisory and National Bank Financial. Shafik Hirani is a director at Investors Group Calgary. And Todd Hirsch is senior economist at ATB Financial. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Hello.
Good evening.
Todd, Obama or Romney, it's too close to call. What potential impacts do you see of either winning the U.S. presidency for we Albertans?
Well, it's interesting. Even though there are a lot of differences in the two men vying for the White House, I don't think it is going to have a dramatic impact, not only on the U.S. economy or on the Canadian economy initially. So I don't know if it really matters that way. Traditionally, when you look back at it, you know, there's some evidence that stock markets rise if there's a Republican. Although I was looking at some research today that sort of held until Clinton years, and the stock market soared under Clinton. So now it really doesn't make any difference it's a Republican or Democrat in the White House for the economy.
Shafik, the Financial Post among those musing that no matter which man wins, the energy sector will lose. Is that pessimistic or realistic?
You know, I saw that article. That seems a little pessimistic because, I mean, Romney himself is a little bit more pro-energy. So I know a lot of Albertan CEOs are hoping he gets in power because he said he's going to, you know, approve Keystone Day One. But I don't think that's really necessarily bad for Alberta if Obama wins. As a matter of fact, it actually is, in my opinion, win-win. The only thing, like Todd alluded to, is the markets themselves lack certainty if the election is close. And it's a close election. If there's certainty in the decision, then you'll see the markets go up, I think, more favorably.
Are we seeing any hints from the market, Jane, of what financial markets would prefer?
The only hint we're seeing is exactly what Shafik said. It's too close to call. And you throw into that the complication with the storms, with the superstorm Sandy on the East Coast. You know, will the polling all get done? How effective will it be to be transmitted? Now there's two more storms, another big storm coming through there, I guess, tomorrow and into Wednesday as well. So that can, again, impede. There's people that, you know, do they have gas? Can they get to the polling station? Yes, they're going to be allowed to email in or fax in, but if you don't have electricity, you can't do those things. So the governments of New Jersey are trying to make sure that everybody gets to vote.
So investors really here not feeling much of anything at this point and maybe not expecting a huge jolt either way.
I think they just want some certainty. They want to know who's going to be in charge, and then they can look at the next thing, which will be the fiscal cliff and the composition of the Congress, the composition of the Senate, and what's the probability of getting something on that resolved more quickly rather than just kicking the can further down the road.
The fiscal cliff referring to
the
government
Bush
debt.
Tax cuts as well as the sequestration from last year.
Todd, will the election change employment in the U.S.? Can either president really shift that very much?
I don't think so. It would be nice if they had some sort of magic wand where upon taking the office they could wave the wand and create 8 million new jobs. They won't. And that's why we heard very scant detail from either of the two gentlemen about exactly what they would do. And in a way, I guess you have to cut them some slack. There's not really a whole lot a president can do or a government can do to actually create those jobs, especially given the massive fiscal deficit in the hole that they're in the United States. It's going to be a tough, long climb out for the U.S. labor market. There's
always good ways and bad ways to look at things. I'm wondering, Todd, if you think, well, perhaps it's not such a bad thing if unemployment isn't soaring right away in the States, because are we getting Americans coming here to feel desperately needed filled jobs in Alberta? Are we attracting Americans at this point?
Well, there might be some, but as far as I know, I don't know if employers in Alberta have been really tapping into that U.S. market. They are still looking abroad, overseas, for temporary foreign workers. But I don't know, unless there are things happening I'm not aware of, I don't know if there really has been a big tap into that U.S. unemployment.
Obviously much better for all of us anyways if more Americans are working. Shafik, you're also watching for Canada Housing and Mortgage Corporation's latest national housing starts Thursday. What might we see there? What would it mean?
Yeah, this is an important one. I know a lot of people are focused on the election, but the announcement is for about 210 to 214,000 new housing starts. If the number is a little bit lower, that could indicate Mark Carney, the Bank of Canada's governor, to extend the time to reduce rates to hopefully stimulate the the Canadian housing market. So it's a good indication of whether the number will affect the Canadian dollar, and that'll affect our portfolios.
Jane, what else are you watching?
I'm watching China, because we've been talking a lot about the U.S. election. In China this week, they start their Congress, which is the once in a decade, where they hand over power. So we've got not only a new president coming in the U.S., potentially, we also have new leadership in China, and those two will have to figure out how they're going to work together. So it'll be interesting to watch whether that handover goes easily and smoothly, and what happens with their military as well as some of the other areas.
Todd, aside from the U.S. election, what's on your radar?
Well, I too am going to be watching the housing starts, maybe for a little bit of a different reason than Shafik. Housing starts are always a good leading indicator. Remember, that's just when the house got started building. So usually about 6 to 8 months down the road, there is a little bit of a bump in retail activity. So when you have a new house, you got to put new carpet and flooring and new appliances, and some people buy new clothes if that seems appropriate to go with the new house. So it is a bit of a leading indicator. It's a good way to justify new clothes. So if we do see a little bump in housing starts in Alberta, that could, spell some good news coming down the road.
Next up, lucky lotto ticket, maybe an inheritance. How many Albertans and Canadians are counting on horseshoes instead of a real retirement plan? That's ahead. Welcome back to Alberta Primetime and the Monday Money Panel. Alberta's Auditor General says our emission reductions are difficult to measure and aren't being reported very well by the province. Todd, is it possible to tell if the efforts by both the private and public sectors are really paying off or not?
Yeah, it's a really difficult sort of situation. Seems like maybe an example of a good idea, but if there's no practical way to measure these things, the idea really does kind of fall apart. It'll be very interesting to watch over the next year or so as they try to get a handle on measurements that are credible and that are acceptable by people. Because,
Shafik, the requirements are a big part of the bottom line for companies, are they not?
Yeah, and as you saw in the Auditor General's report, they haven't been tracking this carbon capture emission technology numbers since it came into place. So a lot of companies, and the problem is a lot of companies don't even track this because there's really not much net benefit. It's a regulated environment, and the technology itself is very new.
Jane, the Alberta government is investing $1.5 billion, as we know, in carbon capture and storage, but CCS has dropped off globally since the recession. Does it still have life, even long-term, as an investment?
I'm not sure as an investment at this point. There's a lot of research being done into it still, and it's joint. It's not just the province of Alberta. I know that the Netherlands are very involved with some of the research on carbon capture as well as some other countries and universities. But to the point of Shafik and to Todd, it's really hard to quantify. So until we can get the science to the point that you can actually use it and have it quantifiable and have it effective, then we're funding the research more than we're funding the actual investment, as it were. But it's an investment still in our future. If we don't do the research, we don't get there eventually.
And Shafik, Todd, you might want to weigh in on this as well. More Alberta companies got funding from climate change and emissions management days ago. How easy or fast is measuring, sort of what Jane's saying, the innovations that are at least happening in the private sector?
Yeah, there's a couple of new innovations that are attempting to convert the carbon oxide emissions into more natural enzymes. And something they've found that they can do anything that will take 120 years, they can do the process in about 4 to 5 years. The problem is the amount of funding is government subsidized, and the framework still isn't privatized. So they're not really getting as much money. But going back to Jane's point, this is going to be the hot topic after the election, this carbon capture and storage emissions to reduce greenhouse emissions. It's going to be hot, it's going to be big, and there's going to be a lot more money worldwide poured into this.
And it's especially an issue because now the provincial government, of course, is dealing with a deficit, sort of an unexpected one a couple of years ago, and it's going to be looking very difficult ways to fill that hole. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with CCS.
November is Financial Literacy Month. The Credit Canada Debt Solutions and Capital One survey released a startling number, that a startling number of Canadians asked, 1/3 say that they will rely on winning a lottery or inheriting some money for their future financial stability. Jane, does that shock you? Does it alarm you?
It's alarming, but not shocking. I've heard it many, many times that people will say, okay, it's okay if I have some debt because I'm going to have X inheritance in, probably in the next 20 or 30 years. The lottery ticket, I've heard and promptly try and persuade people that that's not the best way. A financial plan is something you have to work at. It's like anything else. If it's worthwhile, you have to work at it. You can't just work at it for 1 week or buy one ticket and expect that everything will be good. It has to be lifelong habits.
Even if it's an inheritance that you think you can count on.
You still can't count on it because you don't know when you're going to get it. You don't know how much is really there, and you don't know who else is in that will, and you may not know what that will really says.
Shafik, do you need to be a financial planner to come up with something better than I'll get the inheritance or I'll win the lottery? Are there small, easy areas where people actually can start planning, even if they think they're not good at it? What are your top tips?
I think the first thing people need to do is they need to establish a habit. And the problem with this, anything that people have heard before goes in one ear and comes out the other, and people don't listen. So, giving advice like, establish a regular dollar cost averaging plan, set up a budget, pay yourself first, max out your RSPs and your TFSAs, pay your mortgage down biweekly. Those things people have heard before, and it doesn't resonate as much because they've heard it before.
Well, they're not as fun as the new car or the new clothes, are they?
No, not really. There's better instant gratification with the new car for sure. But those are the habits you need to implement.
Todd, do the shocking results of this survey show that show why we are constantly hearing about a personal debt crisis in our country? Does it boil down to a lack of financial literacy, the knowledge to plan properly?
Well, I think there is a problem with financial literacy. I think there's almost a problem with financial passiveness. People just aren't really interested in even getting some literacy education on it. It's not very difficult. Like Shafik highlighted the points. We're not talking rocket science here, but people are passive. They're almost uninterested in doing it. I think there's two sort of streams of people, and unfortunately, it's the stream of people that are uninterested in it. Those are the messages that Mark Carney sent out. Don't take on too much debt.
Right. The Bank of Canada governor really upset because it's going to cost all of us as a nation, not just the individuals with the spending habits that aren't manageable. Jane, are we seeing government, institutions, schools addressing that lack of knowledge enough if it's becoming a national crisis?
No, and I think it comes back to what Todd was saying is that, and what Shafik was saying, you can tell people. You can tell them and tell them and tell them. But if they don't want to implement simple steps, and if they don't want to be financially literate, they can't teach their children to be financially literate. And there's enough people out there who go, you know what? If I don't get it, I just have to get to 65. I'm going to get CPP and OAS. Well, we all have to understand that those entitlements may not be there in the same way that they are today. They'll likely be there in some way, shape, or form, but not the same way they are today. We have to be responsible for ourselves, just as we are in everything else in our life.
Thank you all for joining us tonight. Jane Alm is a senior investment advisor with Angus Watt Advisory and National Bank Financial. Shafik Hirani is a director at Investors Group Calgary, and Todd Hirsch is senior economist with ATB Financial.